In the cold vacuum of space, where empires rise and fall like distant stars, there exists a truth that most civilizations learn too late. Never underestimate a species that has spent its entire existence fighting itself. The Zephyrian Dominion had conquered 17 star systems. Their war fleets had crushed the crystalline armies of Zarian Prime, turned the gas cities of Helios into burning storms, and reduced the proud warrior clans of Takara to scattered refugees. For 3 centuries they had been the undisputed masters of their corner of the galaxy, their purple banners striking fear into the hearts of 1,000 worlds. But now, as their massive dreadnoughts hung in formation at the edge of an unremarkable yellow star system, something felt different. The humans of Earth had done something unprecedented. Something that made even battle-hardened Zephyrian admirals pause in their conquest. They hadn't surrendered. They hadn't fled. They hadn't even tried to negotiate. Instead, they had sent a single message across the void: "We're bringing back someone you should have left alone." What the aliens didn't know was that humanity's greatest weapon wasn't their technology, their numbers, or even their stubborn refusal to quit. It was their memory. And Admiral Sarah Chen had been retired for 20 years, living quietly on a farm in Montana, when the call came that would remind the galaxy why some legends are born from the ashes of impossible wars. The Dominion thought they were facing just another primitive species ripe for conquest. They were about to discover why humans don't just fight wars, they perfect them. The morning mist clung to the Montana Valley like a soft gray blanket, and Admiral Sarah Chen moved through it with the same quiet precision that had once guided her through asteroid fields and enemy formations. Her boots made soft impressions in the dew-covered grass as she walked the fence line of her small ranch, checking for breaks that might let the horses wander. 20 years of retirement had weathered her face, but hadn't dulled the sharp intelligence in her dark eyes. At 68, Sarah looked like what she was, a woman who had seen too much and survived it all. Her black hair was now streaked with silver, pulled back in the same practical ponytail she'd worn during her naval days. The scars on her hands told stories of spacewalks gone wrong and emergency repairs made under enemy fire. Most people in the nearby town of Clearwater knew her as the quiet woman who sold the best honey in 3 counties. None of them knew she had once held the fate of humanity in her hands. The comm unit on her wrist buzzed with an incoming priority signal. Sarah glanced at it and frowned. She'd kept the military-grade communicator out of habit, but it hadn't received anything more exciting than weather reports and market prices for agricultural products in 15 years. The display showed an encryption level she hadn't seen since her final mission. Admiral Chen, this is Earth Defense Command. Priority Alpha, please respond immediately. Sarah stopped walking. Priority Alpha meant one thing: humanity was in danger. She touched the comm unit with fingers that remembered every button and switch from muscle memory alone. This is Sarah Chen. I'm retired, Commander. You've got the wrong person. Negative, Admiral. We need you to report to Luna Station immediately. Transport is en route to your location. Through the morning quiet, Sarah could already hear the distant rumble of atmospheric engines. A military transport was approaching fast, its signature sound unmistakable to someone who had spent 40 years listening to spacecraft engines. Commander, I haven't been on active duty for 2 decades. Find someone else. There was a pause, then a different voice came through the commodore, familiar, carrying the weight of desperate authority. Sarah, this is Admiral Martinez. We are facing a full-scale invasion. The Zephyrian Dominion has crossed into our space with 1,200 warships. Every defense fleet we have is either destroyed or scattered. The Joint Chiefs have voted unanimously. We need the hero of the Titan Nebula back in command. Sarah closed her eyes. The hero of the Titan Nebula. She'd hated that title from the moment the media had given it to her. Heroes were what politicians called soldiers who survived when they shouldn't have, who won battles that cost everything, who came home carrying the ghosts of everyone who didn't. Roberto, you know why I retired. You know what that last mission cost. I know, Sarah. But right now, you're our only hope. The Zephyrians have technology we've never seen before. Their shields can deflect our best weapons. Their hulls can withstand direct nuclear strikes. And their fighters move like nothing we've encountered. We've lost 4 entire battle groups in the past week. The transport was visible now, a sleek black shape cutting through the morning sky like a blade. Sarah watched it approach and felt the old familiar weight settling on her shoulders. The burden of command, of making decisions that would determine who lived and who died.
How long do we have? Their main fleet will reach Earth in 72 hours.
The outer colonies are already gone. Mars fell yesterday. Mars. Sarah had friends there, people she'd served with who had retired to the Red Planet's growing cities. The Zephyrians didn't take prisoners. She'd read the intelligence reports during her naval years. They conquered completely, enslaving some populations and eliminating others based on criteria that seemed random to human minds. The transport touched down in her pasture with the soft whine of repulsors. The rear hatch opened, revealing 3 figures in Earth defense uniforms. The lead officer was a young captain with lieutenant's bars, her face tense with the kind of desperate respect that comes from meeting legends during the worst possible circumstances. Admiral Chen, Captain Lisa Park, Earth Defense Special Operations. We're here to escort you to Luna Station. Sarah looked back at her ranch house, where she'd spent the happiest years of her life. Her horses watched curiously from the far end of the pasture, unaware that their quiet world was about to change forever. She'd built this place with her own hands after the war, seeking peace in the simple rhythm of rural life. Now that peace was ending, called away by the same duty that had shaped her entire adult life. Give me 5 minutes to pack. Inside the house, Sarah moved with practiced efficiency. She pulled a worn duffel bag from the closet and filled it with the essentials. Clean uniforms she'd kept pressed and ready despite swearing she'd never wear them again. Personal items in a small locked case containing her medals and commendations. At the bottom of the case lay something she'd hoped never to use again. A data crystal containing her personal tactical notes from every major engagement she'd ever fought. As she sealed the bag, Sarah caught sight of herself in the hallway mirror. The woman looking back at her still carried herself like a naval officer, despite 20 years of civilian life. Some things never really left you. The weight of command, the burden of leadership, the cold calculation required to send people to their deaths for the greater good. They all came flooding back as if she'd never left the bridge of a starship. The flight to Luna Station took 4 hours, the transport pushing through Earth's atmosphere and into the familiar black of space. Sarah pressed her face to the small porthole and watched her home planet fall away below. Earth looked peaceful from this distance, its blue and white marble surface, showing no signs of the desperate preparations taking place on its surface and in the space around it. Captain Park sat across from her, obviously wanting to ask questions but not sure how to approach someone of Sarah's reputation. Finally, the young officer cleared her throat. Admiral, if you don't mind me asking, is it true what they say about the Titan Nebula? Sarah had been expecting this question for 20 years. Every young officer who learned her identity asked the same thing, wanting to know if the stories were real or just military legend inflated by time and propaganda. Which story? That you took a single destroyer against 12 hegemony dreadnoughts and won? Sarah was quiet for a long moment, watching the stars through the porthole. The Titan Nebula operation had been classified at the highest levels for 2 decades. The official records listed it as a strategic victory achieved through superior tactical planning. They didn't mention the 843 people who had died making that victory possible. It wasn't 12 dreadnoughts, Captain. It was 11. And I didn't win alone. I had the best crew in the fleet with me. But you saved the colony ships. 30,000 civilians. Yes, we saved them. What Sarah didn't say was that saving those civilians had required sacrificing 2 escort destroyers and most of her own crew. She'd made a choice that night in the nebula, weighing 30,000 innocent lives against the 800 people under her command. The mathematics of war were cold and unforgiving, but someone had to make those calculations. Luna Station appeared through the porthole, a massive wheel of metal and ceramic spinning slowly against the starfield. Sarah had been here countless times during her active service, but seeing it now brought back a flood of memories. This was where she'd received her first independent command, where she'd planned the operations that had ended the Hegemony War, where she'd submitted her resignation after the Titan Nebula incident. The docking bay was crowded with military personnel, all moving with the urgent efficiency of people preparing for war. Sarah noticed the ships berthed along the station's arms, newer designs than she remembered, sleeker and more heavily armed, but somehow they looked fragile compared to the massive vessels she'd commanded during the hegemony conflict. Admiral Martinez was waiting for her at the airlock, and Sarah was struck by how much her old friend had aged. Roberto had been a captain when she'd known him, ambitious and confident, always ready with a joke to lighten the mood during long campaigns. Now his hair was completely gray, his face lined with the weight of command, and his eyes carried the haunted look of someone who had seen too many good people die. Sarah, 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 thank you for coming. They embraced briefly the awkward reunion of old comrades who had shared too much history and too many losses to be entirely comfortable with each other. Show me what we're facing, Roberto. The strategic briefing room had changed little since Sarah's last visit. The same holographic displays showed tactical information, the same comfortable chairs surrounded the central table, and the same sense of barely controlled panic filled the air when senior officers gathered to discuss impossible situations. The holographic display showed the current position of the Zephyrian fleet, a massive formation of ships larger than anything in Earth's inventory, moving steadily toward the inner system with inexorable purpose. Sarah studied the tactical data with the eye of someone who had spent decades learning to read the intentions of enemy commanders. "Their formation is interesting," she said after a few minutes of silence. "Very disciplined, very traditional. Whoever's commanding that fleet is confident, but not reckless. Confident enough to ignore our surrender offer," Martinez replied grimly. "We sent diplomatic channels 3 days ago. They responded by destroying the embassy ship. What do we know about their technology?" A young intelligence officer stepped forward, her arms full of data tablets. "Their shields appear to be based on some form of energy manipulation we don't understand. Conventional weapons are largely ineffective. Nuclear warheads cause some damage, but not enough to disable their larger ships. Their own weapons systems fire some kind of particle beam that can cut through our hulls like paper." Sarah absorbed this information with growing concern. She'd fought against superior technology before, but never with such a significant disadvantage. During the Hegemony War, both sides had been roughly equal in terms of weapons and defenses. This was different. This was like bringing cavalry charges against machine guns. What about their tactics? Straightforward but effective. They approach in formation, engage at long range, and systematically destroy everything that opposes them. No fancy maneuvering, no attempts at deception. They just overwhelm our forces with superior firepower. This worried Sarah more than the technology gap. An enemy who relied on superior equipment was often predictable, but an enemy who combined overwhelming force with disciplined tactics was much more dangerous. The Zephyrians weren't arrogant. They were methodical. "How many ships do we have left?" Martinez's expression grew even grimmer. 43 combat-capable vessels. Most of them are frigates and destroyers. "We have 8 heavy cruisers and 2 battleships. Against 1,200 enemy ships, it was hopeless." Sarah had fought long odds before, but this was beyond anything she'd ever faced. The mathematics were simple and brutal. Even if every Earth ship managed to destroy 10 enemy vessels before being destroyed, they would still lose. "There has to be something else," she said. "Some advantage we haven't considered. That's why we called you back, Sarah. If anyone can find that advantage, it's you." Sarah stood at the tactical display, studying the enemy formation with eyes that had learned to see patterns where others saw only chaos. Somewhere in this information was the key to victory, or at least survival. She'd built her reputation on finding those keys, on seeing the weaknesses that other commanders missed. But as she stared at the holographic representation of 1,200 alien warships bearing down on humanity's home system, Sarah Chen felt something she hadn't experienced since her first command. Genuine uncertainty about whether they could win at all. The legend was back, but legends were just stories people told about ordinary humans who found themselves in extraordinary circumstances. And right now, the circumstances facing humanity were more extraordinary than any story ever told. The war room aboard Luna Station hummed with desperate energy as Earth's remaining military leadership gathered around Sarah Chen. She'd been back in uniform for 6 hours, and already the old familiar weight of command sat on her shoulders like a perfectly fitted coat. The stars beyond the station's viewport seemed brighter somehow, more immediate, as if her return to active duty had sharpened her perception of the vast battlefield that space had become. Fleet Admiral Martinez had assembled everyone who mattered. The Joint Chiefs, senior captains of the remaining fleet, intelligence officers, and weapons specialists. They all looked to Sarah with a mixture of hope and desperation that she found both flattering and terrifying. These were good people, competent officers who had risen through the ranks during peacetime, but none of them had fought the kind of war that was coming. "Before we discuss strategy," Sarah said, her voice carrying the quiet authority that had once commanded fleets, "I need to understand exactly what we're dealing with. Show me the engagement recordings." The holographic display shifted to show the first contact battle near the edge of the system. Sarah watched with growing concern as Earth's 4th Fleet engaged the Zephyrian advance guard. The human ships moved with textbook precision, executing maneuvers that would have been impressive against any known enemy. But the alien vessels barely seemed to notice the attacks. Earth's most advanced missiles exploded harmlessly against energy shields that absorbed the blasts like water soaking into sand. Nuclear warheads that should have vaporized entire ship sections merely caused brief fluctuations in the alien defensive fields. Return fire from the Zephyrian ships carved through human vessels with surgical precision, each beam strike taking out critical systems or cutting hulls in half. "How long did this engagement last?" Sarah asked. 17 minutes, replied Captain Harrison, one of the few survivors from the 4th Fleet. We lost 8 ships and didn't even scratch their paint. Sarah replayed the battle sequence, studying every detail. The Zephyrian ships moved with a fluid grace that suggested advanced propulsion systems, but their formations were rigidly traditional, textbook fleet engagements that any Academy graduate would recognize. That was interesting. Advanced technology paired with conservative tactics often indicated a military culture that valued proven methods over innovation. What about their communication patterns? We've intercepted some of their transmissions, said Commander Walsh from Intelligence. The encryption is beyond our current capabilities, but the signal structure suggests a highly centralized command system. Every ship reports to the flagship. Every decision flows down from the top. That was even more interesting. Sarah had fought against hierarchical enemies before, and while they were often very disciplined, they could be vulnerable to decapitation strikes or communication disruption. The trick was finding a way to exploit that weakness. Show me the latest intelligence on their flagship. The display shifted to show a massive vessel that dwarfed even Earth's largest battleships. The Zephyrian command ship was a work of alien artistry, its hull flowing in organic curves that suggested it had been grown rather than built. Weapons ports dotted its surface like scales on some enormous predator, and the energy readings from its shields were off the charts. We estimate it's carrying at least 50,000 crew members. Walsh continued. The thing is practically a mobile city. Our analysts believe it houses not just the fleet commander, but also the civilian leadership overseeing the invasion. Sarah studied the massive ship with the eye of someone who had spent decades learning how to kill things in space. Size was often a disadvantage in fleet combat. Larger ships were harder to maneuver, presented bigger targets, and required more resources to maintain. But this vessel looked like it could probably survive direct hits from Earth's entire remaining fleet. What's our current disposition? Martinez gestured to another display showing the scattered positions of Earth's remaining naval assets. We've pulled back all surviving units to defensive positions around the inner planets. The Martian Defense Force was completely destroyed, but we managed to evacuate most of the civilian population before the planet fell. Sarah nodded grimly. Mars had been humanity's first successful colony, a thriving world of 12 million people that now lay under alien occupation. Intelligence reports suggested the Zephyrians were treating the human population as slave labor, forcing them to work in the planet's mines and manufacturing facilities. The thought of her former colleagues and friends living under alien domination made Sarah's jaw tighten with suppressed anger. What about Earth's planetary defenses? We've got the orbital platforms and the lunar defense grid, but based on what we've seen of their firepower, I doubt they'll last long against a concentrated assault. Sarah walked to the viewport and stared out at the stars, her mind racing through tactical possibilities. Somewhere out there, 1,200 enemy ships were approaching with overwhelming force and superior technology. By every conventional measure, Earth's defense was hopeless. But Sarah hadn't built her reputation by accepting conventional wisdom. I need to see the classified files on the Titan Nebula operation, she said quietly. The room fell silent. Everyone knew the story, but the actual tactical records remained sealed at the highest classification levels. Martinez hesitated, then nodded to an aide who began entering authorization codes into the secure terminal. Sarah, are you sure about this? Some of those records, they're difficult to read. I know exactly what's in them, Roberto. I wrote most of those reports myself. The holographic display cleared, then began showing files that had been locked away for 20 years. Battle recordings, casualty reports, tactical analyses, and personal logs that told the story of humanity's most costly victory. Sarah watched with the detached professionalism of a surgeon examining her own scars. 20 years ago, the war against the hegemony had reached a critical point. Enemy forces had broken through the outer defense lines and were moving toward the Kepler colony, where 30,000 civilians waited for evacuation. The only ships available to stop them were Sarah's destroyer squadron, 3 aging vessels that were supposed to be heading to the rear for maintenance and resupply. The tactical situation had been impossible. 11 hegemony dreadnoughts against 3 destroyers that were already running low on ammunition and spare parts. Sarah had done the only thing that made sense. She'd used the nebula itself as a weapon. The Titan Nebula was a stellar nursery, filled with gas clouds, electromagnetic storms, and gravitational anomalies that made navigation dangerous even for experienced crews. But Sarah had studied those hazards for months, mapping safe routes through the worst regions, learning to read the patterns of energy discharge that could fry a ship's systems or tear apart its hull. She'd led the enemy fleet into the deepest part of the nebula, using her ships as bait while her crews worked frantically to plant gravitational mines at key points throughout the region. When the trap was sprung, artificial gravity wells had pulled 2 enemy dreadnoughts into a collision course while electromagnetic pulses from hidden charges disabled the shields on 4 others. The plan had worked. The colony ships had escaped. 30,000 lives had been saved, and the hegemony advance had been stopped. But the cost had been horrific. 2 of Sarah's 3 ships had been lost with all hands, and her own vessel had limped away with half its crew dead and the other half carrying injuries that would mark them for life. The same tactics won't work here, Martinez said gently. The Zephyrians aren't going to follow us into a nebula, and we don't have time to set up that kind of elaborate trap. I'm not thinking about the tactics, Sarah replied. I'm thinking about something else entirely. She turned back to the group and her expression had changed. The doubt and uncertainty were gone, replaced by the cold determination that had made her the most feared human commander of her generation. During the Titan Nebula operation, we learned something important about fleet combat that got buried in all the classified reports. When you're facing overwhelming odds, you don't try to match the enemy's strength. You make them play your game instead. What do you mean? Sarah moved to the tactical display and began manipulating the holographic controls. The image of the Zephyrian fleet appeared, along with Earth's defensive positions and the locations of civilian populations throughout the inner system. Look at their formation. 1,200 ships moving in perfect coordination, following standard fleet doctrine, maintaining communication with their command ship. It's impressive, but it's also predictable. She highlighted various elements of the enemy formation, pointing out the spacing between vessels, the positioning of different ship classes, and the clear hierarchy of command and control. They're fighting the last war, not this one. They've conquered other species using overwhelming force and superior technology, so they assume the same approach will work against us. But humans don't fight like other species. How do we fight? Asked Captain Harrison. Sarah smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. Dirty. The next 8 hours were a whirlwind of planning and preparation. Sarah outlined a strategy that made the assembled officers question her sanity, then slowly convinced them it might actually work. It would require perfect timing, incredible luck, and sacrifices that none of them wanted to think about. But it was better than waiting passively for extinction. The key was Earth's industrial capacity. During the 20 years of peace following the Hegemony War, human manufacturing had expanded exponentially. Orbital factories, asteroid mining operations, and automated construction facilities could produce enormous quantities of equipment when properly motivated. The problem was that most of that capacity was geared toward civilian goods, not military hardware. We need to change that, Sarah announced to the emergency session of Earth's civilian leadership. Every factory, every shipyard, every manufacturing facility needs to be converted to war production immediately. President Morrison, a career politician who looked completely out of his depth, objected weakly. Admiral, the economic disruption would be catastrophic. We're talking about completely restructuring our entire industrial base. Mr. President, in 60 hours, we're going to be fighting for the survival of our species. Economic disruption is the least of our problems. Sarah's plan was audacious in its scope. Instead of trying to build ships that could match Zephyrian technology, they would build thousands of simple, disposable drones. Each one would be barely more than an engine, a guidance system, and an explosive warhead, but they would be cheap to produce and easy to deploy. Quantity over quality, she explained to the assembled military leaders. The Zephyrians are expecting to face organized fleets using conventional tactics. They're not prepared for a swarm attack using expendable units. But the drones were only part of the plan. The real innovation was in how Sarah intended to deploy them. Instead of launching a frontal assault that would play to the enemy's strengths, she was going to turn the entire inner solar system into a 3-dimensional minefield. We placed the drones along every major shipping route, around every planetary body, and throughout the asteroid belt, she continued. When the enemy fleet arrives, they'll find themselves surrounded by thousands of potential threats, all controlled by distributed AI systems that can coordinate attacks faster than any organic crew. It was a strategy that played to humanity's strengths, industrial capacity, technological innovation, and the willingness to take risks that other species might consider insane. But it would only work if they could produce enough drones in the limited time available. As the meeting broke up and officers rushed to implement their assigned tasks, Martinez pulled Sarah aside. This is going to require sacrificing the outer colonies entirely, he said quietly. We're pulling all our defensive assets back to Earth. Millions of people are going to be left defenseless. Sarah nodded grimly. I know. But if we spread our forces too thin trying to defend everything, we'll lose everything. Sometimes you have to give ground to win the war. It was the same cold calculation she'd made in the Titan Nebula. Weighing lives against lives, choosing who would live and who would die based on the brutal mathematics of warfare. She'd hoped never to make those decisions again, but command was a burden that couldn't be shared or avoided. As Luna Station transformed into a frenzy of activity, Sarah stood in her temporary quarters looking out at Earth. The blue planet hung in space like a jewel, beautiful and fragile and completely dependent on the desperate plan she'd set in motion. In less than 3 days, the Zephyrian fleet would arrive, and humanity would discover whether legends were made of luck or skill. The ghost of a Titan Nebula had returned to command, but she was no longer the young officer who had learned to wage war through bitter experience. She was something harder now, tempered by years of peace and sharpened by the knowledge that this might be humanity's last chance to prove they deserved a place among the stars. The asteroid belt had never looked so alive. Admiral Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of her flagship, the rebuilt destroyer Defiance, watching as thousands of tiny lights moved through the darkness between Mars and Jupiter. Each light was a drone, a simple, deadly machine no larger than a shuttlecraft but carrying enough explosive power to cripple a cruiser. In the 36 hours since her plan had been approved, Earth's industrial capacity had been transformed into the greatest military production effort in human history. Status report. Sarah called to her operations officer, Commander Jessica Park. The young captain who had escorted her from Montana had been promoted and assigned as her aide-de-camp. We now have 8,412 drones deployed throughout the inner system, Park replied, consulting her displays with the focused intensity of someone who knew millions of lives depended on her accuracy. Another 600 are being launched every hour. The automated factories are exceeding all production estimates. Sarah nodded with satisfaction. Humanity's greatest strength had always been their ability to adapt and innovate under pressure. Give a human engineer an impossible deadline and limited resources, and they would find a way to exceed expectations while simultaneously inventing 3 new technologies that shouldn't have been possible. The drone swarm was a perfect example. Each individual unit was barely more sophisticated than the guided missiles Earth had been building for centuries, but collectively they represented something entirely new in space warfare. Controlled by distributed artificial intelligence networks and capable of coordinating attacks across vast distances, they turned the entire inner solar system into a weapon. What's the status of the Zephyrian fleet? Long-range sensors show them maintaining course and speed, reported Lieutenant Commander Torres from the tactical station. They'll reach the edge of our sensor grid in 18 hours.
No change in their formation or approach vector. That was both good and bad news.
The enemy's predictable approach meant Sarah's preparations were proceeding according to plan, but it also suggested the Zephyrians were supremely confident in their ability to handle whatever Earth might throw at them.
Confidence could be a weakness, but only if you could find a way to exploit it. Sarah moved to the central holographic display that showed the current tactical situation. The Zephyrian fleet appeared as a cluster of red symbols moving steadily inward from the outer system, while Earth's defensive assets were scattered throughout the asteroid belt and around the inner planets. To a casual observer, it might look like humanity was running away, abandoning the outer reaches of their territory to concentrate their forces closer to home. In reality, Sarah was setting the biggest trap in military history. Commander Park, show me the deployment status for Grid Section 7. The display zoomed in on a seemingly empty region of space between Mars and the asteroid belt. To sensors, it looked like nothing more than vacuum and starlight, but Sarah knew that region now contained over 200 drones, each one powered down and drifting in carefully calculated orbits that would bring them into perfect attack positions when the enemy fleet arrived. All units are in position and showing green status, Park reported. The AI coordination network is functioning within normal parameters. We can activate the entire grid with a single command pulse. Sarah studied the tactical layout with the eye of someone who had spent decades learning to think like both predator and prey. The drone swarm was positioned throughout the inner system in overlapping layers, each one designed to channel the enemy fleet into increasingly narrow corridors, where concentrated firepower could be brought to bear. But the real genius of the plan wasn't in the positioning, it was in the psychology. The Zephyrians have been fighting the same way for centuries, she explained to her senior staff during the final briefing. They approach in formation, engage at long range, and overwhelm their opponents with superior firepower. It's worked for them, because most species try to fight the same kind of battle. But we're not going to fight that battle, said Captain Morrison, commander of the heavy cruiser Thunderbolt. We're going to make them fight ours. Exactly. When they reach the outer edge of the drone grid, they're going to encounter scattered resistance that looks like a desperate delaying action. Small groups of drones will attack their advance elements, inflict minimal damage, and then retreat deeper into the system. The enemy will pursue, thinking they're chasing a broken and demoralized defense force. Sarah manipulated the tactical display to show the expected enemy response. The Zephyrian fleet would likely maintain their tight formation while pushing through the outer layers of resistance, confident that their superior shields and weapons could handle anything humanity might deploy against them. By the time they realize they're flying into a trap, they'll be surrounded by thousands of drones and completely committed to a course of action that plays to our strengths rather than theirs. It was the same principle Sarah had used in the Titan Nebula, but applied on a scale that dwarfed her previous victory. Instead of using a handful of ships to manipulate a small enemy force, she was using the entire inner solar system to channel and control a massive invasion fleet. The waiting was the hardest part. Sarah had spent her entire military career learning to manage the tension that came before battle. The hours when everything was prepared, all the plans were in motion, and there was nothing left to do but wait for the enemy to arrive. She walked through the ship, checking on her crew, reviewing tactical displays, and trying to project the calm confidence that good officers needed from their commanders. The Defiance was a new ship built using the lessons learned from 20 years of peacetime technological development, but it carried the name and spirit of the destroyer Sarah had commanded during the HFY War. The original Defiance had been lost during the Battle of Proxima Station, taking 240 good people with it. This new vessel was faster, more heavily armed, and equipped with the latest defensive systems. But Sarah knew that in the coming battle, technology would matter less than the courage and skill of the people who operated it. "Admiral," called Torres from his station. "We're getting the first sensor contacts. The Zephyrian advance guard has entered the outer detection grid." Sarah moved to the tactical display, watching as new red symbols appeared at the edge of the holographic representation. The enemy ships were massive, their energy signatures indicating power plants that dwarfed anything in Earth's fleet. But size and power weren't everything in space warfare. Sometimes the smallest, most agile opponent could bring down the mightiest dreadnought. "Signal all units," she ordered. "Battle stations. Implement Defensive Protocol Alpha." Throughout the inner system, Earth's remaining warships powered up their weapons and defensive systems, while the drone swarm began its carefully orchestrated dance. The first wave of drones, older units that had been hastily converted from civilian equipment, moved toward the approaching enemy fleet, with the sluggish determination of obsolete technology pressed into desperate service. The engagement began exactly as Sarah had predicted. The Zephyrian advance guard encountered the first group of drones and destroyed them with casual efficiency, their particle beam weapons slicing through the simple machines like a sword through paper. From the enemy's perspective, it probably looked like a token resistance put up by a species that knew it was doomed but was too stubborn to surrender quietly. "First wave eliminated," Taurus reported. "Enemy casualties none. They're maintaining course and speed." Sarah watched the tactical display with growing satisfaction. The first wave had never been intended to inflict damage. Their job was to gather intelligence on enemy weapon systems, defensive capabilities, and tactical responses. Every drone that died transmitted valuable data back to the coordination network, information that would be used to make the later attacks more effective. Second wave, initiate contact. This time, the drones were more sophisticated and better coordinated. Instead of attacking individually, they swarmed the enemy ships in groups, forcing the Zephyrians to divide their defensive fire. A few drones actually made it through the alien shields, their explosive warheads creating brief flashes of light against armored hulls. "Minor damage to 2 enemy vessels," Taurus announced. "They're adapting their defensive patterns to compensate for the swarm tactics. That was expected." The Zephyrians were professional military officers who would learn from each engagement and adjust their tactics accordingly. But Sarah was counting on that adaptability. Every change they made in response to the drone attacks moved them further away from the rigid formation that was their greatest strength. Third wave, execute harassment protocol. The third wave of drones approached from multiple vectors, using the asteroid belt and the gravity wells of nearby planets to mask their approach. Instead of direct attacks, they focused on disrupting the enemy formation, forcing individual ships to break away from the main group to deal with threats from unexpected angles. Sarah watched with professional admiration as the Zephyrian commander responded to the new threat. The alien formation began to expand, individual squadrons moving to cover vulnerable flanks and protect their supply vessels. It was exactly the right tactical response, but it was also exactly what Sarah had hoped they would do. "Signal the fleet," she ordered. "Begin Phase 2. Throughout the inner system, Earth's surviving warships began moving toward their assigned positions. Unlike the expendable drones, these vessels represented the last of humanity's organized military strength. 8 cruisers, 15 destroyers, and dozens of smaller craft that had been refitted for one final desperate battle. The plan was complex. requiring precise timing and perfect coordination between organic crews and artificial intelligence systems. As the Zephyrian fleet continued its advance, drawn ever deeper into the drone-infested inner system, Sarah's ships would begin closing the trap from multiple directions. Enemy fleet is now within optimal engagement range, Torres announced. All grid sections report ready for synchronized attack. Sarah stood at the center of the bridge, surrounded by displays showing tactical information, ship status, and the movements of thousands of individual units throughout the solar system. This was the moment she'd been preparing for, the culmination of 3 days of frantic planning and desperate preparation. All units, this is Admiral Chen. Execute Operation Swarm. The order went out instantly, transmitted simultaneously to every drone, every ship, and every automated system in the inner solar system. For a moment, space itself seemed to hold its breath, and then the trap was sprung. From every direction, thousands of drones converged on the Zephyrian fleet. They came from the asteroid belt, from hidden positions behind planetary bodies, from the empty regions between worlds where no sane commander would think to look for threats. The coordination was perfect, achieved through AI networks that could process tactical information and adjust plans faster than any organic brain. The enemy response was immediate and devastating. Particle beams lanced out in all directions, destroying dozens of drones with each shot, while defensive systems that could track hundreds of targets simultaneously began picking off the attacking swarm with mechanical precision. But for every drone destroyed, 2 more seemed to take its place, and the sheer number of targets was beginning to overwhelm even the Zephyrians' advanced defensive capabilities. Multiple hits on enemy vessels, Torres reported, his voice tight with excitement. We're getting shield fluctuations on at least 30 ships. The coordination network is adapting attack patterns in real time. Sarah watched the holographic display with growing anticipation. Individual drones were still being destroyed in large numbers, but the concentrated attacks were finally beginning to have an effect. Shield generators overloaded by continuous impacts, armor plating buckled under repeated explosions, and weapon systems failed as critical components were damaged by debris. But the Zephyrians were not helpless victims. As the drone swarm pressed its attack, the enemy fleet began implementing countermeasures that Sarah hadn't fully anticipated. Instead of maintaining their defensive formation, they suddenly accelerated, pushing deeper into the inner system at maximum speed, while their point defense systems created corridors of clear space around their most important vessels. They're adapting faster than projected, Park observed with concern. The fleet commander is using the momentum of his advance to break through the heaviest concentrations of drones. Sarah nodded grimly. She'd expected the enemy to be competent, but their tactical flexibility was impressive. A less experienced commander might have tried to retreat when faced with the swarm attack, but the Zephyrian leader was pushing forward, betting that he could reach Earth's orbital defenses before the drones could inflict critical damage. Signal all fleet units, Sarah ordered. Implement contingency plan, Charlie. The human warships that had been moving into flanking positions suddenly changed course, abandoning their planned attack runs to instead position themselves between the enemy fleet and Earth. It looked like a desperate last stand, a final attempt to buy time for the planet's evacuation. But Sarah had something else in mind entirely. All ships prepare for synchronized missile launch. Target the enemy flagship. The Defiance and its companion vessels had been holding their most powerful weapons in reserve, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Now, as the Zephyrian command ship pushed through the heaviest concentration of drones, Sarah was ready to reveal the final element of her trap. Every human warship in the inner system fired simultaneously, launching their entire inventory of heavy missiles at the massive enemy flagship. The weapons were the best Earth could produce. Fusion warheads guided by AI systems and capable of adjusting their approach patterns based on real-time analysis of enemy defenses. The missile barrage streaked through space like a river of fire, converging on the Zephyrian command ship from dozens of different vectors. The enemy's defensive systems responded with desperate efficiency, shooting down missile after missile with pinpoint accuracy, but there were simply too many targets to engage simultaneously. Multiple hits on the flagship, Torres announced. We're seeing major damage to their forward sections. Shield strength is down to 60%. Sarah allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. The enemy command ship was wounded but far from defeated. However, damage wasn't the primary objective of the missile attack. Disruption was. The concentrated assault had forced the Zephyrian flagship to divert power and attention away from fleet coordination, creating the opening Sarah had been waiting for. All drone units execute termination protocol. Throughout the inner system, the surviving members of the drone swarm suddenly changed their behavior patterns. Instead of continuing their harassing attacks, they began converging on the most damaged enemy vessels, abandoning all defensive programming in favor of kamikaze runs that would inflict maximum damage. The results were spectacular and terrible. Hundreds of drones threw themselves against weakened shields and damaged hulls, their explosive warheads detonating in coordinated sequences that created cascading failures throughout enemy ships. Vessels that had survived the initial swarm attack found themselves overwhelmed by suicidal machines that cared nothing for self-preservation. 17 enemy ships destroyed, Torres reported, his voice filled with amazement. Another 43 showing major damage.
The AI coordination network is processing battle damage assessments faster than their repair systems can compensate. Sarah watched the tactical display with the satisfaction of a chess master who had just executed a complex combination.
The drone swarm had done its job, but the battle was far from over. The Zephyrian fleet had been bloodied and disrupted, but they still possessed overwhelming numerical superiority and technology that Earth couldn't match. "Signal all units," she ordered. "Prepare for Phase 3. It's time to see if legends are made of luck or skill." As the Defiance and the rest of Earth's fleet moved into their final attack positions, Sarah thought about the young woman who had first taken command of a destroyer 40 years ago. That officer had believed in textbook tactics, proper procedures, and the idea that wars were won through superior strategy and preparation. The woman standing on this bridge had learned that wars were won by people who were willing to do whatever it took to protect what they loved, even if it meant sacrificing everything they had ever been taught about honor and proper conduct. The Zephyrians were about to discover what happened when you threatened the one species in the galaxy that had never learned to accept defeat gracefully. The swarm had awakened, and now it was time for the legend to prove that some stories were worth believing in. The space around Earth had become a graveyard of shattered metal and dying light. Admiral Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the Defiance, watching as the scattered remains of her drone swarm continued their deadly dance with the Zephyrian invasion fleet.
The first phase of her desperate plan had succeeded beyond her wildest expectations. Nearly 200 enemy vessels had been destroyed or disabled, their hulks drifting through the asteroid belt like broken monuments to alien arrogance. But victory still seemed impossibly distant. The surviving Zephyrian ships, more than 1,000 strong, had reformed their battle lines and were pressing toward Earth with renewed determination. Their massive flagship, wounded but still functional, hung in the center of their formation like a malevolent star, its weapons systems charging for what promised to be the final engagement of the war. "Status report," Sarah called, her voice cutting through the controlled chaos of the bridge. "We have 18 operational warships remaining," Commander Park replied, her face illuminated by the glow of tactical displays. "Ammunition is down to 30% of normal loadouts. The Thunderbolt has lost main power, and the Ranger is reporting critical damage to her reactor core." Sarah absorbed this information with the calm professionalism of someone who had learned long ago that despair was a luxury commanders couldn't afford. They were down to their last reserves of everything: ships, ammunition, personnel, and hope. But they were still fighting, and as long as Earth's defenders drew breath, the battle wasn't over. "What's the status of Earth's orbital defenses?" Lieutenant Commander Torres manipulated his displays, highlighting the ring of weapons platforms and defensive stations that surrounded humanity's home planet. "All platforms are operational and fully armed." Admiral Martinez reports that the evacuation of non-essential personnel is complete. Military targets have been hardened, and civilian populations have been moved to the deepest shelters available.
Sarah nodded grimly. Earth's orbital defenses were formidable, built during the peacetime years when humanity had expanded throughout the inner system.
But against the firepower the Zephyrians had demonstrated, even those impressive fortifications would only delay the inevitable. Unless something changed dramatically in the next few hours, this battle would end with Earth's surrender or destruction. "Admiral," called Ensign Martinez from the communications station, "we're receiving a transmission from the enemy flagship. They're requesting a parley." This was unexpected. Sarah had studied every intelligence report available on Zephyrian military doctrine, and none of them had mentioned any tendency toward negotiation during active combat. The aliens had conquered 17 star systems without offering terms to any of their victims. Why were they suddenly interested in talking? "Put it through," Sarah ordered. The main display shifted to show the interior of what was obviously an alien command center. The being that appeared on screen was clearly Zephyrian, tall and graceful, with the distinctive purple skin and elongated features that intelligence files had described. But what struck Sarah immediately was the expression of surprise and grudging respect on the creature's face.
"I am Fleet Commander Zek Thule of the Zephyrian Dominion," the alien said, speaking accented but fluent English. "You are Admiral Sarah Chen, the one they call the hero of the Titan Nebula." Sarah studied her opponent with professional interest.
Zakthul looked like a career military officer, someone who had risen through the ranks based on competence and experience rather than political connections. The respect in his voice was genuine, as was the wariness in his large dark eyes. I am Admiral Chen, commanding Earth Defense Forces. What do you want, Fleet Commander? To offer you terms, Zakthul replied. Your defense has been impressive. More impressive than anything we've encountered in 3 centuries of conquest. You have destroyed nearly 200 of my ships using tactics that none of our strategists anticipated. Sarah felt a cold smile cross her face. I'm not done yet. Perhaps. But you cannot win this engagement, Admiral. Your ammunition is nearly exhausted. Your planet's defenses, while admirable, cannot withstand the firepower we can bring to bear. Everything Zakthul said was true, but Sarah had built her reputation on finding victory in impossible situations. What are you offering? Surrender now, and your species will be allowed to survive as part of the Dominion. You will retain limited autonomy over your internal affairs. Your military personnel will be treated with honor as prisoners of war. Your civilians will be relocated to worlds where they can contribute to the greater glory of our empire.
It was a better offer than the Zephyrians had made to any previous species, but Sarah knew what it really meant.
Humanity would become slaves, their homeworld would be stripped of resources, and their culture would disappear within a generation. The honor Zakthul spoke of was just a polite way of describing permanent subjugation. Counteroffer, Sarah replied. Withdraw your fleet from our system, and we'll let you keep the ships we haven't destroyed yet. Zakthul's expression shifted to something that might have been amusement. You are either very brave or very foolish, Admiral Chen. I suspect both. I've been called worse things by better people, Fleet Commander. The alien leader was silent for a moment, studying Sarah through the communications link with the intensity of a professional soldier evaluating a worthy opponent. When he spoke again, his voice carried a note of genuine regret. I had hoped to avoid unnecessary bloodshed. Your species has already demonstrated that you are capable warriors worthy of respect. But if you will not accept reasonable terms, then we must finish what we came here to do. Then we'll see you in the fire, Commander. The transmission ended, leaving Sarah's bridge in tense silence. Everyone present understood what had just happened. The last chance for a negotiated peace had been rejected, and now the final battle would determine whether humanity survived as a free species or disappeared into the darkness of alien conquest. All ships, Sarah announced over the fleet communication network. This is Admiral Chen. The enemy has offered us surrender, and we have declined. In approximately 1 hour, we will engage the full strength of the Zephyrian invasion fleet in defense of our homeworld. She paused, looking around at the faces of her crew. Young and old, experienced veterans and recent academy graduates, all united by their determination to protect the planet that hung blue and beautiful in the viewports around them. I won't lie to you. The odds are terrible. We're outnumbered, outgunned, and running low on everything except courage. But we're fighting for something the enemy can never understand. We're fighting for home. Not just a planet or a political system, but for the right of humanity to choose its own destiny among the stars. Through the communication system, she could hear the responses from other ships, cheers, battle cries, and the quiet determination of people who had chosen to face impossible odds rather than accept defeat. It was a sound that sent shivers down her spine and reminded her why she had returned to active duty. We're going to use every trick, every advantage, and every dirty tactic we can think of. We're going to hit them where they don't expect it, when they don't expect it, and with weapons they've never encountered before. And if we're very lucky and very skilled, we might just remind the galaxy that humans are the most dangerous species ever to crawl out of a gravity well. The next hour was a frenzy of preparation as Earth's remaining forces made ready for what everyone understood would be their final engagement. Weapons were armed, systems were checked, and personnel were moved to battle stations. The orbital defense platforms around Earth charged their massive particle cannons while the surviving ships of the fleet formed up in the attack formation Sarah had designed. It was not a conventional formation. Instead of the organized battle lines that military doctrine suggested, Sarah had arranged her ships in a loose, seemingly random pattern that would allow them maximum flexibility of movement. Each vessel had been assigned specific targets and objectives, but they were also authorized to act independently if communications were severed or circumstances changed rapidly. Enemy fleet is beginning their final approach, Torres announced. They're maintaining formation but increasing speed. Estimated time to engagement, 23 minutes. Sarah moved to the tactical display and began making final adjustments to her battle plan. She'd learned something during the first engagement that she hoped to exploit during this final confrontation. The Zephyrians were disciplined and professional, but they were also predictable. They fought the same way they had for centuries, relying on superior technology and overwhelming force to achieve victory. Signal all drone control networks, she ordered. Prepare to implement the Prometheus protocol. Park looked up from her station with surprise. Admiral, we only have about 400 drones left operational. The Prometheus protocol was designed for a minimum of 2,000 units. Then we'll make do with what we have, Commander. Sometimes you have to play the hand you're dealt. The Prometheus protocol was Sarah's final gambit, a tactical innovation so dangerous that it had never been tested under actual combat conditions. Instead of using the remaining drones as individual attack units, the plan called for them to be linked together into a single coordinated weapon system that could deliver concentrated firepower against the most critical enemy targets. The risk was enormous. If the coordination network was disrupted or if the enemy adapted to the new tactics faster than projected, the entire remaining drone force would be destroyed without achieving any significant results. But conventional attacks had already proven insufficient against Zephyrian technology, and desperate times called for desperate measures. All ships assume attack positions, Sarah commanded. Remember, we're not trying to win a traditional fleet engagement. We're trying to buy time for the Prometheus protocol to work. Hit them fast, hit them hard, and don't give them a chance to coordinate their responses. The Zephyrian fleet approached Earth like an unstoppable force of nature, their massive ships moving in perfect formation while their weapons systems charged for the final assault. From their perspective, this must have seemed like a routine mopping-up operation. The destruction of a few remaining human vessels before the real work of planetary conquest could begin. They were about to discover that legends were made for moments when ordinary people chose to do extraordinary things in defense of everything they held dear. Sarah Chen had spent 20 years trying to forget the lessons of the Titan Nebula, but now those hard-learned truths were about to be written across the cosmos in letters of fire and blood. All units, this is Admiral Chen, she announced as the enemy fleet entered weapons range. Today we find out whether humans deserve a place among the stars. Engage at will. The final battle for Earth's survival began with a thunderclap of unleashed energy that lit up the space around humanity's homeworld like a new sun being born. And at the center of it all, standing on the bridge of a ship named Defiance, Sarah Chen prepared to discover whether the legend of the hero of the Titan Nebula was strong enough to save the species that had created it. The universe exploded into light and fury around Admiral Sarah Chen as the final battle for Earth's survival reached its crescendo. The Defiance shuddered under the impact of Zephyrian particle beams, her hull plates glowing cherry red from near misses that had come within meters of breaching her armor. Around her, the last remnants of Earth's fleet fought with the desperate courage of warriors who knew they were writing the final chapter of their species' story. Direct hit on the Thunderbolt, Commander Park reported, her voice steady despite the chaos surrounding them. She's lost main propulsion and is drifting out of formation. The Ranger is down to emergency power only. Sarah gripped the railing around the tactical display, watching as red symbols representing human ships winked out one by one. They had inflicted significant damage on the enemy fleet. The space around Earth was littered with the burning hulks of Zephyrian vessels. But it wasn't enough. For every alien ship destroyed, 3 more pressed forward, their weapon systems carving through Earth's defenses with methodical precision.
Status of the Prometheus protocol, drone coordination network is holding steady, Torres announced from his station.
We have 347 units remaining in the linked formation.
The AI systems report ready for final implementation. Sarah nodded grimly. The Prometheus protocol represented humanity's last desperate gambit, all remaining drones operating as a single coordinated weapon system, their individual targeting computers linked through quantum communication networks that allowed them to function as one massive distributed intelligence. It was a beautiful piece of engineering, but it had never been tested against an enemy as advanced as the Zephyrians. Fleet Commander Zokthul is requesting another communication. Ensign Martinez called from the comm station. Put him through. The main display shifted to show the interior of the enemy flagship, and Sarah was struck by how much damage the massive vessel had sustained. Emergency lighting cast harsh shadows across Zokthul's command center, and she could see technicians working frantically at damaged control stations. The alien commander himself looked exhausted, his purple skin marked with cuts and burns from his own ship's battle damage. Admiral Chen, Zokthul said, his voice carrying a note of weary respect. This has gone on long enough. You have fought with honor, but you cannot win. Surrender now, while you still have ships left to surrender with. Sarah studied her opponent through the communication link, recognizing the expression of a professional soldier who was growing tired of unnecessary bloodshed. Zoctul was right about the tactical situation. Earth's remaining forces could not defeat the enemy fleet through conventional means.
But Sarah had built her reputation on finding unconventional solutions to impossible problems. You're right, Fleet Commander.
I can't win this battle the way we've been fighting it. Zoctul's expression shifted slightly, perhaps hoping that the human admiral was finally ready to see reason. But I'm not planning to fight it the same way, Sarah continued.
Commander, how familiar are you with human military history? We have studied your species extensively, Admiral. Your tendency toward self-destructive behavior has been noted. Then you know that humans have a saying, if you're going to lose anyway, make sure you take the bastards with you. Sarah cut the communication channel and turned to her crew, seeing in their faces the same grim determination that had carried her through 40 years of impossible battles.
They all understood what was about to happen, and none of them were backing down. All ships. This is Admiral Chen.
Execute final protocol. The Prometheus formation is authorized for immediate implementation. Throughout the inner solar system, the last surviving drones of Sarah's swarm began moving toward a single point in space, directly between the Zephyrian fleet and Earth's orbital defenses. As they converged, their individual AI systems began merging into a single, unified intelligence that could process tactical information and coordinate attacks faster than any organic mind. But the drones weren't just linking their computers. They were physically connecting as well, using emergency docking clamps and magnetic grapples to form a massive multi-component weapon platform that stretched for kilometers through the vacuum of space. From a distance it looked like some sort of mechanical organism, its hundreds of components moving with the fluid coordination of a living creature.
Prometheus formation complete, Park announced. All systems showing green. The linked AI network is online and responding to command inputs. Sarah moved to the helm station and began entering a series of commands that she had hoped never to use. The Prometheus protocol wasn't just about creating a superweapon. It was about creating a weapon that could think for itself, adapt to changing conditions, and continue fighting even after its human controllers were dead.
Admiral,
Torres called urgently. The enemy fleet is changing formation. They're concentrating fire on the drone formation. Sarah watched as hundreds of Zephyrian ships began turning their weapons toward the massive construct that hung in space between them and their target. Particle beams lanced out across the vacuum, striking the linked drones with devastating effect.
individual components were vaporized instantly, their destruction sending ripples of disruption through the connected network, but for every drone destroyed, the formation adapted. Backup systems activated, redundant connections formed, and the AI network rerouted its processes through undamaged nodes. The Prometheus formation began to move, its remaining components flowing like liquid metal as it repositioned itself to minimize damage from enemy fire.
"It's working," Park breathed in amazement. "The formation is adapting faster than they can destroy it." Sarah allowed herself a moment of satisfaction.
Humanity's greatest advantage had always been their ability to innovate under pressure, to find new solutions when traditional approaches failed. The Prometheus protocol represented the culmination of that innovative spirit, a weapon that could literally evolve during battle. "All remaining ships concentrate fire on the enemy flagship," Sarah ordered. "We need to keep their attention divided." The Defiance and her surviving sister ships opened fire with everything they had left, their missiles and energy weapons streaking toward the massive Zephyrian command vessel. The enemy flagship's defensive systems responded with devastating efficiency, destroying most of the incoming ordnance before it could reach its target, but the attack served its purpose, forcing the aliens to split their attention between multiple threats. In that moment of divided focus, the Prometheus formation struck. The linked drones had been maneuvering to gain optimal attack position using the gravitational pull of nearby planetary bodies to accelerate to unprecedented velocities. When they finally attacked, it wasn't with the scattered, uncoordinated strikes that the Zephyrians had learned to expect. Instead, they moved as a single entity, their combined firepower focused on a single point in the enemy flagship's defensive grid. The result was spectacular. Hundreds of explosive warheads detonated in perfect synchronization against the command ship's weakened shields, creating a cascade failure that rippled across the massive vessel's defensive systems. Secondary explosions bloomed along the flagship's hull as damaged systems overloaded and critical components failed. "Direct hit," Torres announced. "The flagship is showing major structural damage. Their shield generators are offline." But the victory came at a terrible cost. The concentrated defensive fire from the entire Zephyrian fleet had finally overwhelmed the Prometheus formation's adaptive capabilities. One by one, the linked drones were being destroyed, their coordinated intelligence fragmenting as critical nodes were eliminated. "Formation integrity is down to 30%, Park reported.
The AI network is beginning to lose coherence. Sarah watched the tactical display with growing despair as the last of her trump cards was played out.
The Prometheus protocol had succeeded in damaging the enemy flagship, but it hadn't been enough to turn the tide of battle.
In a few more minutes, the formation would be completely destroyed, and Earth's defenses would face the full fury of the surviving Zephyrian fleet. Unless
an idea began forming in Sarah's mind. Born from the same desperate creativity that had saved her during the Titan Nebula operation. It was insane, potentially suicidal, and would require perfect timing and enormous luck.
But it was also their only remaining chance. Commander Park, signal all remaining ships. Tell them to prepare for emergency acceleration toward the enemy flagship. Admiral, that's suicide. Their defensive fire will tear us apart before we get within weapons range. Not if they're busy dealing with something else, Sarah replied grimly. Torres, can you establish a direct communication link with the Prometheus AI network?
Yes, ma'am.
The quantum communication system is still functional. Sarah moved to the communication station and began entering a series of commands that would have been considered war crimes under normal circumstances. But these weren't normal circumstances. This was the final hour of humanity's existence as a free species, and conventional morality was a luxury they could no longer afford. Prometheus Network, this is Admiral Chen. Authorization code Alpha 7 Delta. Implement terminal protocol Omega. There was a pause, then a synthesized voice responded through the communication system. It sounded almost human, but there was something alien about its cadence. The voice of an artificial intelligence that had been born in the crucible of battle and shaped by the desperate needs of war. Admiral Chen, implementation of terminal protocol Omega will result in the complete destruction of all remaining network components. Probability of mission success is estimated at 37%. I understand the risks. Execute the protocol. Throughout the space between Earth and the Zephyrian fleet, the surviving members of the Prometheus formation began moving toward the enemy flagship with renewed purpose. But instead of attacking its weapons or shields, they were heading directly for its massive hull, their remaining explosive warheads armed for maximum destructive effect. The Zephyrians realized what was happening and concentrated all available firepower on the approaching drones, but it was too late. Moving with the coordination of a single organism, the artificial intelligence that controlled the formation had calculated the optimal approach vectors, the precise timing required, and the exact points where maximum damage could be inflicted. The first drone struck the flagship's hull amidships, its warhead detonating with the force of a small nuclear weapon. The second impact came milliseconds later, followed by dozens more, in a cascade of perfectly timed explosions that tore through the massive vessel's armor plating like tissue paper. All ships, maximum acceleration. Sarah shouted over the chaos. Hit them while they're distracted. The Defiance and the surviving remnants of Earth's fleet accelerated toward the enemy formation, their engines pushed beyond safe operating limits in a desperate race to reach attack position while the Zephyrians were still reeling from the loss of their flagship. The space around the dying command ship was filled with debris and secondary explosions as critical systems failed throughout the massive vessel. Emergency lights flickered and died, atmosphere vented from ruptured hull sections, and the graceful organic curves of the ship's alien design were twisted into grotesque shapes by the force of internal detonations. Fleet Commander Zoctool's final transmission was brief and tinged with something that might have been admiration. You fight like demons, Admiral Chen. Perhaps your species deserves to survive after all. The flagship's destruction sent shockwaves through the entire Zephyrian fleet as surviving vessels struggled to reorganize their command structure and respond to the unexpected assault. In that moment of confusion, Sarah's ships struck with everything they had left, their concentrated firepower targeting the enemy vessels that had been positioned closest to their destroyed command ship. Multiple enemy vessels destroyed, Torres reported. Their formation is breaking up. Some ships are beginning to withdraw toward the outer system. Sarah watched the tactical display with growing amazement as the impossible began to happen. Without their flagship's coordinating influence, the Zephyrian fleet was losing its disciplined cohesion. Individual ship commanders, uncertain of their orders and shocked by the loss of their leadership, were making independent decisions about whether to continue the attack or retreat to regroup. Signal all remaining ships, Sarah ordered. Press the attack. Don't give them time to reorganize. The final phase of the battle was a running fight that stretched across the inner solar system as Earth's surviving vessels pursued the retreating Zephyrian fleet. It wasn't the glorious victory that military historians would later describe, but rather the messy, chaotic aftermath of a desperate gamble that had somehow succeeded against all odds. By the time the last enemy ship had fled beyond the outer planets or been destroyed by Earth's pursuing forces, Sarah found herself standing on the bridge of a damaged ship in the middle of a debris field that had once been the most powerful invasion fleet in Zephyrian history. Final casualty report. she requested quietly. Commander Park consulted her displays with the exhausted expression of someone who had survived something that should have been impossible. We have 7 ships still operational, including the Defiance. Total casualties are significant. But Admiral, we won. Against all odds, we actually won. Sarah looked out at the starfield beyond the bridge viewports where Earth hung like a blue jewel against the darkness. Somewhere on that planet, children were playing in parks, families were gathering for dinner, and people were going about their daily lives completely unaware that they had just been saved from extinction by a handful of stubborn humans who had refused to accept defeat. The legend of the hero of the Titan Nebula had come to an end, replaced by something far more important, the beginning of humanity's reputation as a species that would never surrender, never give up, and never accept that any battle was truly impossible to win. In the years that followed, word of Earth's victory would spread throughout the galaxy, carried by Zephyrian survivors who spoke of humans with a mixture of fear and respect. Other species would learn that the small blue planet in an unremarkable solar system was home to beings who fought like demons and planned like angels, who could turn defeat into victory through sheer stubborn refusal to accept the inevitable. But for now, Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of her battered ship and watched the sun rise over Earth, marking the beginning of a new day for a species that had earned its place among the stars through courage, sacrifice, and the kind of legends that were worth believing in.